You know, every time you get an opportunity to partner and to mingle here at one of these symposia, you learn something. And it's not something that you expected to learn. It's something that you just bump into, and it sticks with you. And that is, I think, one of the most interesting features of an AIAA convention or symposium. My thanks to the AIAA for having me today, and to the selection committee for placing me in the distinguished company of prior recipients of this award. My thoughts actually turn to them, as they set a standard that truly inspires not just service, but distinguished service. It is said in Japan that the best day of service is when the emperor places the sword on both shoulders and welcomes one to government. After that, it's all downhill until you're asked to leave. This is a bit like being a boater, where the best day of your life being when a boat is first purchased, and the second best day is when it's sold. My initial thought on being asked to step up to service was reminiscent of a cartoon figure I remember, Rex the dog, seen on a high wire, spinning plates and balancing artifacts, with the caption reading, "Rex knew that he was an old dog and that this was a new trick." Truly, the initial process is somewhat daunting. For all of the questioning of friends and neighbors, one of our neighbors at a vacation condo here in Florida stopped us one day and asked, "Are you all okay?" I think they were surprised that we were not in jail, as they had been brusquely interviewed by agents. Then once the process had wound down and C-SPAN had duly recorded my interview in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, watched, I'm sure, by tens across America, I received from the Brookings Institute a congratulatory t-shirt with a locked door suddenly opening and the candidate jumping through into the starry, unknown atmosphere on the other side. Though I was proud to have led great organizations in industry and had prior service, this was to be unique and different. Don Rumsfeld was a great mentor, as this was his second round as Secretary of Defense, and he had put out some rules to live by as a public servant. Though he once described us all as representatives of the American taxpayer, that thin veneer placed in charge by the civilians of an ongoing industrial, military, and civilian enterprise. He also added two others. The first, don't let your ego get in front of your nameplate, which is applicable in both industry and in government. And the second, that the taxpayers have loaned you your office, and someday they will want it back. And he suggested that we give it to them promptly. For all of that, I found both the career civil servants and all of the ranks of the military very responsive to ideas and slight course changes as they were proposed to them. They are very deserving of our praise and respect. What I'd like to do today is to share with you a little of my own philosophy and journey that marked my opportunity to serve in big government, and illustrate for you the concept and content of making an impact on the larger society while fully involved in the time-consuming treadmill that marks big government. There are always expectations that many have for achievement when you get involved in high office. In fact, I created a concept called the elf in the bush, which as your role concludes and you are walking down the river entrance, it jumps from the bush and inoculates you with vision. This vision allows you to now go on the speaking circuit full of wisdom, advising your successor what they should be accomplishing while they're in office. The harder part is actually pulling off any part of the vision while you are actually in office. This also recalls the story of the individual in the alligator swamp, who was reminded while fighting off the alligators that his mission is and was to drain the swamp, not to wrestle alligators. Recognizing this syndrome after some time in office, I decided I would write down a set of accomplishments that were to be read at my departure ceremony for my initial incarnation in the acquisition organization. I offered these to my staff with the thought that to set a goal and achieve it was praiseworthy, while to not set a goal and then record it with 20/20 hindsight was less so. Two of these at the time were as follows. The first, to restore systems engineering to development. Second, to have passed a National Defense Education Act similar to the NDEA in 1958 to expand the talent pool for American engineers and science. These two alone were daunting and required enormous effort with lots of university presidents, support from my undersecretary, support from the OSD staff, and the DDRNE at the time was Ron Sega, by the way, and he helped because he organized the university presidents and outside science talent to weigh in, as well as we had to get some resources out of that skinflint Rumsfeld and getting these all ratified by the various armed services panel. I found out it can be done. Each has made a tremendous impact. Within the buying commands that the input of the systems engineers is now welcome and is involved in all major reviews. The National Defense Act was passed in 2008 with Senator Ted Kennedy's support, becoming the top-level science, technology, engineering, and mathematics award, and has funded quality graduate education programs all across America. There are many other goals that frankly required actions by successors to both carry forward and decide to become champions of them. I offer these two as indicators of what can be done while the F-35 and the V-22 were actively managed and the base realignment and closure process took national political attention. The call to do public service can involve more than the job assigned and should be seen as an opportunity to help the future. Setting out the goals early and often lets others lend their support and focuses the organization on how they can assist and then celebrate success with you even at their busiest times. Because my journey for the first half of service relied on both an engineering and management path, I wanted to stop here and acknowledge that the AIAA has been my supporter since they published my first joint paper on multiple reentry vehicles, which anchored my master's degree in 1970, and then a joint paper on the AC-130 gunship program titled Sightline Autopilot, a new concept in air weapons, in 1973. I would encourage any in this audience not to shy from publishing, as the experience gained from being able to present these to an audience of peers underpinned my sustained interest in research and engineering well after I entered the world of management. But it really helped in the next phase of service. I mentioned big government early because my Air Force service as a junior officer allowed me to experience much to be proud of and had its own impact, such as firing up young minds as they began their service in air and space, or participating in a small enough program office that I was able to see from R&D all the way through to logistics. But as I was honored to transition from the acquisition organization into the Secretary of the Air Force, I recall the adage that there are only two levels of strategic thought in the military: second lieutenants and four-star generals, as everyone else in between was way too busy to actually think strategically. While I taught, my ability to think about strategy was expanded, but truly being asked to lead the organization was well beyond my expectations. This time I was ready for a delay in the process, as the agents again fanned out across America to closely examine my background. Now, some would think that having been the head of acquisition in the DoD, it might be foreshortened, but no. This was my third time in this process, and I actually got to know the set of investigators relatively well. I mean, over the 5 years, I saw one to put his child through college. But I had a second opportunity to look forward, to ask what I wanted to accomplish, beyond assisting the commanders in winning the fight, an immediate and compelling activity, of course. I wrote the first of 31 letters to airmen, one for each month I was allowed to lead this finest Air Force in the world. In the first letter, I mentioned a revised mission, goals, and objectives. I reviewed this with my partner, General Buzz Mosley, who is a true warrior and leader in his own right, and gratefully was my chief of staff and very helpful to me. Later, with the support of the organization, we put all of these on a wallet-sized card, and I brought some with me today that you're welcome to and can be picked up here on the steps up to the podium. Of these, there again are two with the greatest impact external to the Air Force. The first, putting cyber into the mission of the Air Force. This was a game changer, opening up to American ingenuity the problems of intrusion in the cyber domain. Both Buzz Mosley and I knew that this was a controversial move, because once the bell was rung, it could not be unrung. This was a gathering storm trumpeted by the National Security Council, and yet the greater population was not fully aware. Once in the mission of a service, America really turned on the research and development, and the response has been very gratifying. Clearly, this problem of intrusion is still challenging, and I still look forward to a clever engineering solution that essentially doesn't raise the bar, but shuts the door. The second one was a goal to prepare for and engage in the joint fight. Little did I know that the fight was not only the enemy, but we had to deal with natural disasters. We had to deal with humanitarian search and rescue. So I want to dwell a little bit on a system called Rover, which was developed to allow connection with an aircraft to the ground commander, and it did. This became a new American way of war, precision with spherical situation awareness. Then an enterprising airman, Colonel Greg Harbin, took the hardened laptop and some Predator tracking cameras to New Orleans during the aftermath of Katrina and helped first responders there find flood-stranded citizens. Greg wasn't allowed to fly Predators, so Greg went to the 57th story of the Hilton and tied one Predator camera on looking out at a street, and then went 90 degrees and put another one there. And then he went with the police, because now you can track across neighborhoods. They loved it, as you can imagine. So this helped first responders end finding of stranded citizens throughout the city. The same connection then allowed forest fighters to be advised about dangers behind them as well as in front. That transition of this technology started with military drones, has now been accepted by the Civil Air Patrol, and greatly enhances their capability to conduct search and rescues in the forest, both here in the U.S. and elsewhere. Here I want to point out the effect that one can have by pushing an area of research and then allowing those involved to creatively think on their own to extract the maximum effect of the technology. I'll begin to close by recalling a cartoon that underscores the impact that technology can have. I remember this one because there was a standing army out front, and the king was addressing them. And then behind the staging tent was his staff was examining a Gatling gun. They sent a messenger out. The king turned to the staff messenger and said, "I have no time to talk with some salesman. You know, I have a war to fight." And on they went, off to battle. Though this gives the game away with my linkage to both industry and AIAA, the R&D roots of the organization are clear. I'd like to now share my philosophy of supportive service from a part of a book on the Toyota manufacturing system. It addresses one responsibility of service in a leadership position to search out and remove barriers to the success of the organization and the elements within. This is true service, and one that I can commend to you. This can't be about simply what one person can do, but multiplied by the many that are motivated to assist. What I have tried to illustrate here is that anything that I have wanted to accomplish during my term in public service was not without a dedicated and driven organization that in some cases risked a little and worked a lot to foster and achieve some truly remarkable outcomes. I'd like to salute all of those that serve with me, as I always learn from them and am humbled by their own service. Mistakes? Oh, there were many, and some quite widely known. Yes, you need leadership that allows for some failings and appreciates that sometimes objectives are not always precisely parallel. All in all, my service was filled with pride, and thus, no matter what the end is, a parade or getting thrown in the Potomac, I would always say to rise up and say proud to serve. What I have talked of here, and more that I haven't been able to illustrate, were as a result of a total team effort. That said, I would again commend to you some characteristics that perhaps you can use in your own career. Respect for those you are privileged to work with. Reaching for goals and objectives beyond the everyday. Communicating with the organization how they can best help. Giving the credit back to all that you can reach, for without their assistance and the work they perform, the task in public service can be very lonely. Again, I am humbled by this award. I thank the AIAA for providing me again a podium for discussion, and thanks to you all for listening to a little of my journey, and I hope it inspired more than a few of you to your own journey in public service. Thank you very much.
Mike, thank you very, very much. Well, on behalf of all of us here and the AIAA overall, I'd like to thank Secretary Wynne. Hopefully his comments have inspired many of you in this audience to look forward to a career in public service. At this time, I'd like to present you with, we're going to have to duck for this. All right. One of us isn't as tall as the other.
Working?
We'll send these to you if you like. Well, folks, that concludes our luncheon.